When you become disabled, no one sits you down and says, here's a handbook on how to be disabled, and here's a series of books that you can read. And I don't have that handbook or a series of books, but I do have this series of books. Hi, welcome to my series, Disability 101, where we talk about things that I hope are helpful for young and newly disabled individuals. My name is Lisa, and I am a PhD student studying communication studies with a focus in disability culture and identity. I am disabled myself, and I've been disabled my entire life, so I have read a lot of books. And so in this video, I hope that we can talk about some books that I think would be helpful if you're just stepping your toes into the world of disability and disability history. Now, I want to clarify that unfortunately, as a North American scholar in the United States, I tend to know the most about North American disability politics and history, and I'm trying to expand outside of the United States and Canada. So if you have books about disability outside of the United States and Canada, especially in the Global South, please, please, please give me the suggestions down below. You have no idea how helpful you will be for my PhD, especially as I prepare for my comprehensive exams. So we have a wide range of books today. I have some more narrative-based books, some books that are more introduction to disability history and perspectives, and then more academic perspectives that complicate what we already know. The first book that I want to talk about is a selection of essays collected by Wong, who has now passed away. This book is absolutely incredible. As you can see, I have notes in here. It is just an incredible perspective to disability, especially if you're just getting into the world of disability, because they are first-person stories from the 21st century talking about what it means to be disabled, and not just from one perspective, but from a wide variety of experiences. The goal of this book is not to paint what disability is, but a lot of the ways that disability can exist. The next book I want to talk about are the Cancer Journals by Audre Lorde. This is Audre Lorde's personal reflections about her experience with cancer. She is a writer and a poet. She's a Black lesbian who experienced cancer, and I just love this book so much. She brings so much nuance to disability from a queer perspective, especially a Black queer perspective, that I personally have needed to return to multiple times. It was so instrumental and foundational for the way that I view myself and started thinking about disability, even though she doesn't explicitly talk about disability in this. Absolutely incredible. Strongly recommend. First two books out of the gate. You're going to address a lot of complex feelings about the systems that are in place for people with disabilities and the ways those systems fails. The next book I'm going to suggest is actually an academic textbook. It is called Introducing Disability Studies, edited by Ronald, Berger, and Loren Wilbers. It is an undergraduate textbook. It's just a really basic introduction to disability studies and disability history, especially in North America, that I think gives a really great general understanding. Now, with it being a general understanding of disability, there are certainly areas that I wish were explored more in detail. However, with some of the other books that I'm going to talk about, I think if you had this and some of the others, that they pair well together. So you have lots of different perspectives to disability and kind of have a base understanding to operate to look at all of the different nuances and perspectives. So the next book I want to start off with a more recent history to disability, and that is The Future is Disabled. This book is absolutely beautiful. It is a book that I cried over. I strongly recommend it. It is a love song. It is a morning call. It is everything in response to COVID-19. It talks about the things that were sacrificed. It talks about mutual aid. It talks about organizing. It talks about envisioning a future that is disabled and what that means. And I love this book. I especially think and encourage, if you have become disabled, especially if you are disabled due to complications because of COVID, I think this book is really, really important to understand the world that you are coming into and the community and like the place and time that you came into the disability community. There's so much pain that is still here and still present, and I think this book beautifully just pinpoints that pain. Especially, I think this was published in 2021, and that pain I still felt today, and it's a beautiful book, and I think we need to talk about it. The next book that I want to talk about is actually a book that I just finished called Black Disability Politics. It's been on my TBR for a long time. It's by Sami, Schalk. And this book is incredible. It is heavy. It is very, very heavy, and it goes into the complex history of disability in the Black community. It's specifically what it's doing is talking about the ways that the Black community and Black thinkers and advocates have contributed to Black disability politics, and even if they're not explicitly talking about disability. And this book really makes you sit and process and think about violence and what it means to have disability as a result of violence, in a way to kind of investigate how we're also talking about that, and how we center or like demonize. There's a section that talks about how we demonize disability in talking about disabling violence, when we really need to be focusing on the violence and supporting the people who have become disabled because of violence. And I will be thinking about this book for a very, very long time, and I think everyone should read it, especially if you are a Black disabled person. This book was written for you to understand history and understand your history in the ways that the community has contributed to disability politics, and I think it's just a very, very powerful book. This is another book that I debated putting on this list because I do think that it's more beneficial if you have a stronger foundation in disability. So if you have already read all of these and you feel confident, then I think Exile and Pride by Clare is a good book. It is beautifully written. It is by a disabled trans man who grew up disabled in a rural area, and he talks about the complicated relationship with all of it. It's very narrative and academic at the same time. It is complex. There are a lot of things that Clare here is challenging that I think that we just assume as reality in some disability studies perspectives, and it's definitely made me sit and think and process. But I will warn you, I left this book with so many questions, and I think that's the goal of the book also, is to just make us question, to make us think, and to challenge some of our taken for granted ways of thinking. Last book I would recommend, I don't have a physical copy of it because I borrowed it from the library, specifically Queer Liberation Library. Shout out, love them. Strongly recommend if you're not already registered with them. It's a free library focusing on queer stories and histories, and they have lots of like theory and perspectives and complex, like not just fiction books, which is really cool. The last book is called Feminist Queer Crip by Alison Kafer. And in this book, she talks about what does Crip theory and perspectives mean to her, not just to her, but like overall. It's a big book. It's a big book that's referenced a lot, that I reference a lot. It is a book, again, that I have to reread. That's the thing, is there's so much about disability and about trying to view disability, and I have a video that I'm working on that breaks down what does disability mean. And I know I've talked about this in the past, but I really want to break down like different ways of being disabled, more than just our diagnoses, but like there's a lot of complexity to disability, and I think that sometimes disrupts our discourse because one person is talking about disability in one way and one person's talking about it in another, and then they disagree, and it's because they're not talking about the same thing. And so I do think that Alison Kafer's book is a really great foundational book to kind of sparse out some of those nuances and understanding disability from a really complex political perspective. And that's my recommendations. Whoopee! I know I just gave you guys a lot of books to read. This is not something that you should probably do or would do over the course of a week. These are the books that I have read in my nearly 10 years of academic experience that have really shaped how I'm viewing disability and thinking about disability. And the big thing to know is, one, is that there's a lot of different perspectives to disability. Two is, please be cautious when you are entering disability studies worlds. I have like more traditional disability studies books here. However, the problem with these books is that they tend to be centered on whiteness, especially white men. because for some reason, a lot of disability studies and even online disability discourse tends to try to like isolate disability into just about disability, which kicks out anybody who's not a white man, because the only person who is just disabled is literally a white man. So disability is inherently intersectional, which means that our reading needs to be intersectional. We need to be reading about racism because racism affects ableism and ableism shapes racism. We need to be reading about homophobia and ableism. We need to be reading about anti-immigration and disability and ableism, because these are things that are affecting our world. This is how disability is felt. This is the way that ableism is experienced, and it shapes every single one of our experiences today. That's the biggest lesson I think you can learn in the very early stages of being disabled, is that you are not alone. Our community is vast, and there's so many ways to experience disability. And the best thing that you can do is commit to be a member of our community. And that means learning about your experience and then learning about other people's experiences in our community and understanding their history and our history and the ways those things intersect. I hope you liked this video, and if you want to talk more, have any questions or thoughts, especially if you have book recommendations yourself, please, 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 what is your favorite book? What are some books that have made a huge impact on you and the way that you view disability, your disability, other people in the community? Share. This is a place to learn, grow, develop our thoughts, and start thinking of a better future. I had to start putting these back now.